tonight began with a group of women from the Tudor era, individuals who treated moral codes as little more than polite suggestions, each one weaving her own scandal into the grand tapestry of history. Their world was obsessed with virtue, chastity, and public image, which rendered every breach of these ideals infinitely more entertaining. So, before settling in, pause for a moment. Like the video if you truly enjoyed these journeys into the past. Subscribe only if you feel a genuine connection. And please, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. There is something deeply fascinating about the quiet chorus of listeners joining together, night after night, across continents. Dim the lights now. Perhaps let a gentle fan hum softly in the background. Let's ease into tonight's historyless tale, deliciously indecent, yet forever entwined with destiny. Anne Boleyn. She didn't simply break hearts, she fractured an entire church. This is no exaggeration. It's the summary on her cosmic dating resume before Anne's arrival. Henry VIII was the archetype of a Renaissance monarch, loud, vain within dangerous proximity, and married to a woman he'd grown weary of several feasts ago. Then Anne entered the scene, welcomed the king's advances with a subtle and brilliant refusal, and England remained intoxicated ever since. Anne wasn't beautiful in the poetic sense, cleverness, and an uncanny ability to make powerful men lose their composure. She was educated in France, which by Tudor standards meant she could both flirt and read, both highly suspicious in a woman. At least to the guardians of virtue. When Henry attempted his trademark royal charm, Anne turned him down with a polite composure. So polite, he mistook it for playful encouragement. For 7 years, the king pursued her relentlessly, like a lovesick teenager with a tax base at his disposal. Letters, gifts, royal promises. Anne responded with patience, tempered by skill. He offered jewels. She returned unwavering silence. He pledged eternal love. She replied with a blank stare until, at last, he built a church just for her. Eventually, Henry took the hint and severed England from Rome's grasp. Their union began in fireworks and ended in a storm of accusations, witchcraft, the full Tudor starter pack. Anne gave birth to Elizabeth I, which would have been acceptable were it not for the fact that the newborn was female. Henry craved a son, a lasting legacy, and someone to absorb blame when destiny soured. In the end, he received a daughter who would later reduce his memory to a mere footnote. Anne herself didn't bolster her cause. Sarcastic, sharp-minded, and never one to laugh at jokes, she found dull qualities viewed with suspicion as criminal in the 16th century. Gossip swelled. Evidence was fabricated. So suddenly, she was accused of affairs with half the royal musicians. Even her brother found himself dragged into the scandal as the court ran out of logic and dignity. Her trial was Theodora's conclusion foretold long before. Anne stood dignified, delivered her defense with calm precision, and met her fate under the swift blade of French expertise. They called her immoral, manipulative, wicked doll, the names that powerful women attract when men find themselves unable to control them. Anne Boleyn didn't just seduce a king, she seduced destiny itself. England, in her wake, became stranger, kinkier, bloodier, and far more compelling than before. If Anne was the woman who led Henry VIII to break the church, Catherine Howard was the soul who robbed him of his last crumb of dignity. By the time Catherine entered his world, Henry was nearing old, age-heavy, worn, and romantic in the way of a sack of flour. Catherine was bright, naive, a teenager raised amid chaos that today's social services would not quickly recover from. She was also Anne's Cassandra, fact which history, in hindsight, should have taken as an omen. The Howards knew their type, beautiful, ambitious, and always drawn toward disastrous choices. Catherine was placed at court as a lady-in-waiting, a position tantamount to royal girlfriend auditions in Tudor England. Henry noticed her. She noticed his crown or, perhaps more likely, his treasury. Their courtship was brief, their wedding swifter. By 1540, Catherine was queen, and Henry fancied himself resurrected in youth. He called her his rose without a thorn. The truth is, roses thrive best in manure. Catherine played her role, the adoring young wife, with remarkable skill, until she began an open affair with Thomas Culpeper, a handsome member of the court. Their romance was barely concealed. Notes, meetings, rumor scandale bloomed with the vigor of Tudor syphilis. An older boyfriend, Francis Derham, surfaced, seeking recognition. Always wise when the husband is the king. When Henry discovered the truth, the transformation was biblical. The loving husband vanished instantly. Catherine was torn from Hampton Court, screaming, interrogated, and condemned for treason. In Tudor vocabulary, treason sometimes meant little more than embarrassing the king. At her execution, she apologized for her sins, admitting candidly that pleasure had tempted her more than virtue. Historians have long debated innocence, folly, or simply youth cast into the world's worst arranged marriage. Perhaps all three. Catherine Howard was swept away by forces she could not understand, a teenage consort to a man who took divorce as foreplay. She entered history as caution. In Tudor England, love could earn you a crown, lust, a grave, and the twin could grant immortality. But before Anne Boleyn ever wove her spell over Henry VIII, her sister Mary arrived first, discreetly, efficiently, without breaking a single documented commandment. Mary Boleyn was an early prototype, charming, flirtatious, and always content to ignore long-term consequences. Sent as a teenager to the French courtroom's grandest finishing school for scandal, she quickly became infamous for her diplomatic adventures. King Francis I called her my English mare, and yes, that was considered polite by the standards of the Renaissance. When she returned to England, Mary's reputation preceded her, and naturally the Tudor court decided she would be perfect wife material. She married William Carey, a minor nobleman whose historical achievement consisted largely of standing nearby while the king slept with his wife. Henry's affection for Mary was quiet. By royal comparison, no divorces, no beheadings, just delicate gifts, whispered gossip, and the occasional royal baby. Mary birthed 2 children. One, Henry Carey, so favored the king's countenance that even the painters coughed discreetly. But Mary wasn't ambitious. She lacked Anne's drive and survival instinct. When Henry moved on, Mary was abandoned with fading beauty, rising debts, and memories of a crown she'd worn only in secret. While Anne became queen, Mary was nudged to the edge of court, marrying for greatest scandal, marrying for love. Her second husband, William Stafford, was a soldier modest in station, lacking fortune. The Tudor elite were appalled. A Boleyn marrying for affection. Exiled from court for degrading herself, a strange fate, considering her earlier station as royal mistress. Mary spent the remainder of her days quietly in the countryside, poor, peaceful, outliving every soul who once judged her. She began as mistress to a king. She ended as a contented wife. Sometimes the most indecent thing a Tudor woman could do was survive. Jane Shore technically lived in an age before the Tudors, but her legend was too salacious to be ignored. She became the template for every fallen woman who followed. Intelligent, beautiful, morally flexible, destined to become a sermon illustration. Jane started her journey as the wife of a respectable merchant, the sort of man who exuded the aura of accounting. Conned, but she caught the attention of Edward IV, a monarch with more charm than restraint, and their affair blossomed as an open secret. The court delighted in her presence. The church despised her, and the king treated Jane as if she were England's favorite holiday. Jane wasn't greedy or manipulative. She was genuinely kind of perilous trait in a royal mistress. She used her influence to help the poor, pardon prisoners, and convince the king to postpone executions, at least until after breakfast. in a court built on cruelty. She was the rare anomaly, a good soul in the wrong place. When Edward died unexpectedly, Jane's luck vanished. Richard III seized power. He needed a scapegoat, and Jane, attractive, outspoken, and newly unemployed, fit the role perfectly. He accused her of witchcraft, seduction, and general indecency. Her crime, in translation, possessing standards and refusing to feign sorrow over yet another tyrant. Her punishment became legendary. She was forced to make public penance, walking barefoot through London in a thin white chemise. The crowd was scandalized and entranced in equal measure. Chroniclers claimed the public wept for her. In reality, some fainted, most followed her home, but Jane survived. She endured long enough to see herself transform. Cautionary tale, folk heroine, and ghostly lesson told by preachers secretly enamored. Her true crime wasn't adultery, was audacity, in a world demanding women to be silent, plain, gay, and replaceable. Jane Shore never meant to be history's most famous penitent, but confronted by humiliation, she turned repentance into theater. As every Tudor court soon discovered, a well-staged sin endures far longer than any virtue. Every royal court requires at least one woman who can flirt with her pen. Mary Shelton fills that place in Henry VII's world, a lady-in-waiting, who translated innuendo into literature, and literature into trouble. Another Boleyn cousin, predisposed genetically to scandal. The Boleyns were not simply a family, but a dynasty of flirtation, capable of sparking political crises with a single glance. Mary was witty, highly educated, fluent in that universal Tudor dialect of accidental double meaning. Her poems, preserved in the Devonshire manuscript, offer a blend of love, satire, and mild filth. On the surface, she wrote of devotion and longing. In truth, her verses double as Tudor pickup lines, armored with exquisite vocabulary. One line reads, "When I remember your parting face, mine heart doth ache in every place." It's beautiful, though parting face might mean much more than high school. English teachers would have you believe. Her words traveled the court, disguised as art. The Tudor elite adored poetry that read, chaste, but resonated indecented with sin packaged with sophistication. Her lines whispered of forbidden glances, stolen kisses, and passions that, had she been less charming, would have provoked an exorcism tonight. As these stories soften and slow, let them lull you deeper into sleep. The women of Tudor England, each embroiled in their own deliciously indecent adventures. Their scandals remain not merely in the history books, but in the echo of every whispered rumor, every secret letter, and every poem passed hand to hand in candlelit halls. Rumor has it that Mary Shelton also caught Henry's attention, though whether that fascination was physical or poetic depends on how generous one feels toward Henry's reading comprehension. She was young, clever, and confident, three qualities the king found both irresistible and deeply threatening. Fortunately, Mary never crossed the dangerous line into full mistress status, a restraint that may have literally saved her neck. Mary Shelton belonged to a rare breed of Tudor women who could seduce without touching, insult without penalty, and survive without ever apologizing, while her more ambitious cousins lost their heads to the guillotine. Mary was writing poems about heartbreak, probably smiling quietly at the fates of others. History tends to forget most female poets of the 16th century, but Mary left her mark in ink sharp, Scandalous, and centuries ahead of her time. She never ruled a kingdom, but she conquered something arguably more difficult, remaining witty, alive, and just scandalous enough to make her poems immortal. Every Tudor scandal needs an accessory, and few wore that title better than Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochester. She was the kind of woman who entered a room quietly and left it on fire. Intelligent, observant, relentlessly nosy, Jane didn't start scandals. She poured oil on them and took notes. She married George Boleyn, yes, that Boleyn, superb man whose charm was famously less durable in reality than in rumor. Their marriage was infamously miserable. Jane found George arrogant. He found her exhausting. Somewhere between whispered insults and long silences, Jane decided if she couldn't be loved, she might as well be feared. When her sister-in-law Anne Boleyn fell from grace, Jane stepped forward as a helpful witness. Testimony that Anne and George were far too close helped send them both to the chopping block. Historians still debate her motives: jealousy, revenge, or a spectacular lack of self-awareness. Whatever the truth, Jane became one of the rare Tudor women to survive someone else's downfall. For a time, Jane kept her head down. Then, along came Catherine Howard, Henry's teenage wife, and Jane saw a chance to be useful once more. She became the young queen's confidant in Tudor terms. That meant carrying messages, arranging secret meetings, and watching while Catherine indulged in extracurricular diplomacy with Thomas Culpeper. When the affair was uncovered, Jane tried to feign surprise impressive, considering she had helped schedule it. During interrogation, she broke down, ranted incoherently, and briefly descended into madness. Her execution was delayed because it was considered impolite to behead lunatics. When she regained enough composure to stand upright, they killed her anyway. At her beheading, Jane apologized for slandering the innocent queen in Tudor terms, a 16th century version of admitting, "I may have gone too far." Jane Boleyn's life reads like a cautionary tale written by someone who hated subtlety. Betray one queen, destroy another, lose your mind, and die on a cold February morning. In a court filled with liars, she simply excelled until she didn't. If Tudor England had a LinkedIn, Elizabeth Bestblout would have listed her profession as mistress of influence and selective morality, not royal, noble, or well-born. Bess had one talent vital in the 16th century. She understood how men in power thought and knew exactly how to make them forget their caution. Bess became the mistress of Thomas Cromwell, the king's right-hand man, original bureaucratic shark who dismantled monasteries and people with equal cold efficiency. Cromwell was brilliant, cold, and allergic to affection. Yet, he kept Bess close. Historians suggest she softened him. More likely, she reminded him that pleasure still existed between executions. At court, Bess was both admired and feared. Cute. She wore silk when others wore linen, smiled when others prayed, and collected secrets as other women collected jewels. Cute. Rumors whispered that she aided more than one ambitious nobleman, helpful in Tudor slang, often meaning candlelight and regret. Cromwell's enemies murmured that Bess had too much access, too much influence, and far too little shame. That combination was fatal in a realm where even queens were beheaded for looking smug. When Cromwell fell from favor, accused of treason, overreaching, and marrying Henry to the wrong woman, Bess vanished. One day, draped in velvet, the next gone like spilled perfume. No trial, no record, just silence. Some say she fled abroad. Others claim she bribed her way into anonymity. A few romantics insist she slipped into a convent, though the chance of Bess Holland volunteering for celibacy is about as likely as Henry taking up veganism. What is certain is this: for a brief, glittering moment, she navigated Europe's deadliest court, armed only with wit, charm, and an unshakable talent for survival. She never got a portrait, title, or happy ending, but she earned something rare as she lived in Tudor England, an achievement worth carving on any tombstone. She remains the ghost of Cromwell's ambition, a courtesan in silk, forgotten by history, but remembered by every man who learned he could not control her. If ambition had a perfume in Tudor England, it would smell like in Seymour, Duchess of Somerset, expensive, cold, and faintly poisonous. She was the woman who didn't smile unless it served strategy. Her beauty, famous, composure, legendary, and reputation, frosty with a chance of execution. Anne married Edward Seymour, Henry VIII, third wife and the only one who produced a legitimate son without divorce or beheading. Edward became uncle to the future king. and Anne the queen of every corridor that truly mattered. She wore her new status like armor, treating the ladies in waiting like unpaid interns with mild contempt and sharp direction. When Edward became Duke of Somerset and Lord Protector for young Edward VI, and effectively ruled England unofficially, with none of the humility of actual queenship. She built grand houses, hosted lavish feasts, and demanded her servants address her as your grace, with a kind of severity suggesting they might not survive forgetfulness. Beneath this icy polish was a woman who understood the danger in softness. The court called her cold-hearted, mostly projecting the discomfort of men outmaneuvered by pearls. She wielded silence as a weapon and charm as camouflage. Anne Seymour wasn't scandalous by Tudor standards. No lovers, no drunken feasts, no secret letters. Her perversion was subtler. She lusted not for bodies, but for power. When her husband fell from favor and was executed, Anne was thrown into the Tower. Her crime was simply being herself, too efficient, too competent, too dangerous. Later, she was released, but by then, her influence had melted away like candle wax at midnight. Seymour died quietly, an extraordinary miracle in Tudor England. She left behind no great lovers, no juicy intrigues, only a reputation for being terrifyingly competent in a world that preferred its women beautiful, brainless, and expendable. And didn't seduce men, she intimidated them. Somehow, that was even more dangerous. By the time Catherine Parr arrived at court, Henry VIII had run out of both cartilage and wives. He was old, paranoid, and one ulcer away from a medieval fireworks display. Catherine, however, had the one quality none of his previous wives possessed: common sense, which naturally made everyone suspicious. Catherine wasn't born to be queen. She was a twice-widowed noblewoman who had spent a life quietly reading books, managing estates, and avoiding decapitation. She was intelligent, kind, and devout, three traits in Tudor England that were the social equivalent of waving a red flag at a bull wearing a mitre. When Henry proposed, Catherine politely accepted. Refusing the king typically resulted in a sudden interest in French architecture, namely the Tower of London. She became Henry's sixth wife in 1543 and immediately set about doing what no one else, meant keeping him alive and relatively calm. Catherine nursed his wounds, flattered his ego, and managed to smile convincingly while he compared her to his deceased ex-wives. But Catherine was no mere nursemaid in pearls. Beneath modest gowns and whispered psalms was a sharp political mind. She supported Protestant reform, published theological writings, a bold move in a time when writing could be a death sentence, and debated religion with the king himself. Henry found this fascinating until he didn't. One evening, he reportedly muttered that she should be arrested for heresy. Catherine, sensing divine reasoning losing to royal indigestion, quickly threw herself at his feet, claiming she'd only argued to distract him from pain. Henry melted instantly. It's a 16th century version of "I was only joking." After Henry died, Catherine finally gained what she had long desired: freedom. She married Thomas Seymour, the charming but utterly untrustworthy brother of Jane Seymour. Fortunately, being a widow with money married to an ambitious man was only slightly less dangerous than being Henry VIII's wife. Catherine Parr died in childbirth in 1548, having outlived Henry and outsmarted nearly everyone else. She stood unique among Tudor queens, alive, literate, and still mildly sarcastic, a remarkable success story in a court of loud scandals. In a realm where seducing a king often ended in ruin, Elizabeth Bess Blount managed to become Henry VIII's mistress without igniting palace fires. A rare feat in an age when gaining the king's favor usually led to public disgrace or sudden widowhood. Bess was beautiful, charming, and, most dangerously, agreeably modest, which historians often translate as smart enough to know when to keep silent. She entered court as one of Queen Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting, position roughly equivalent to an unpaid intern, inches from disaster. And so the stories of Tudor women continuate weaving a complex dance of power, wit, survival, and scandaling the shadowed corridors of history, where whispers linger like fading candlelight. Henry noticed her during a dance, a moment both flattering and deeply unsafe. He admired her grace, her youth, and above all, the fact that she never argued with him about theology. Their affair was brief, sweet, and surprisingly free of scandal. No public letters, no temper tantrums, no continental wars. Bessie understood the first rule of royal romance: never outshine the monarch. She was discreet to the point of near invisibility, which, ironically, made her irresistible. When she became pregnant, the entire court pretended not to notice. A remarkable feat, considering subtlety was hardly the Tudor trademark. In 1519, she gave birth to Henry Fitzroy, the king's only acknowledged illegitimate child to name, so regal it sounded as if he were born with a crown. Henry adored the boy, showered him with titles, and even considered naming him heir. For a brief moment, Bessie's son stood on the threshold of destiny until, as was common for Tudor heirs, he died young. As for Bessie, she handled motherhood and royal discard with equal composure. Henry rewarded her with a suitable marriage to Gilbert Talboys, quiet gentleman, essentially a Renaissance version of an early retirement package. She bore him more children, avoided gossip, and lived long enough to witness her more ambitious successors lose their heads, literally. Bessie Blount was neither a schemer nor a saint. She was a woman who understood the dangerous arithmetic of power: one affair, one son, and 0 executions. In the blood-soaked soap opera of Tudor England that made her practically a genius, while others pursued crowns, Bessie chose survival. And in Henry's England, that was the most seductive move of all. Tudor England were a chessboard. Frances Howard would have been the queen who smiled sweetly while toppling every other piece. Born into the powerful Howard clan professional survivors of royal tempers, Frances was raised on court politics, gossip, and the unshakable belief that sin is just strategy with better lighting. Her story unfolded during the late Tudor age, when the crown had passed to the morally exhausted Stuarts, but the court's appetite for scandal had not dimmed. Frances was young, stunning, and inconveniently married to a man she despised, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, who, despite his title, had the sexual charisma of a damp tapestry. Bored and beautiful is a dangerous combination. Frances fell in love with Robert Carr, King's favorite, which, in plain English, meant the man the monarch liked to flirt with while pretending not to. To be with Carr, Frances needed an annulment and exploited a law requiring proof her marriage had not been consummated. She told the court her husband could not perform, and even allegedly smuggled in a substitute woman to prove his impotence in front of witnesses. Imagine the world's worst dinner party, but with legal implications. Her annulment succeeded, and she married Carr. For a while, it looked like a fairy tale, till Sir Thomas Overbury wrote a poem calling her immoral. Naturally, Frances poisoned him. When caught, she denied everything, then admitted it, then insisted it was justified. This strategy didn't win her friends, but it did land her in the Tower with her husband. Most Tudor women in that situation ended up beheaded or forgotten. Frances, however, flirted her way into a royal pardon. She and Carr were released, disgraced but alive, statistically a victory in Tudor England. She lived quietly afterward, occasionally popping up in gossip as a fallen woman turned devout. Whether genuine penitence or another performance, we'll never know. Frances Howard proved that, in a world run by men, the most perverted thing a woman could do was refuse to play the victim and still get away with it. Margaret Douglas held a place near the peak of Henry VII's family tree, probably rolling her eyes at her own fate. She was his niece, granddaughter of the Tudor king, royal enough to be important, but not quite important enough to be safe. In Tudor England, that was like being born with a target on your back. Margaret had beauty, charm, and the sort of romantic instincts that make biographers sigh. Her life was a sequence of forbidden love affairs, each ending in prison, scandal, or both. She treated royal bloodlines the way others treat horoscopes. It's interesting, but not a deal-breaker. Her first great disaster was Lord Thomas Howard, Anne Boleyn's uncle, and professional bad idea. Their romance bloomed while Henry VIII dismantled his own marriage. The king, never fond of being upstaged in matters of the heart, declared their engagement treasonous. Both were imprisoned in the Tower. Thomas died there. Margaret escaped only after promising not to fall in love again. Naturally, she immediately did. A second affair with Charles Howard landed her locked up once more. You might think she would have learned, but Margaret had the soul of a poet and the self-preservation instincts of a candle in a gale. Every man she chose was politically radioactive or already claimed. She had a type career ending and stubbornly embraced it. She understood that love was both her weapon and her weakness, wielding it with calculated persistence. Later in life, she became the matriarch of a dynasty that outlasted all her tormentors. Her grandson, James VI of Scotland, would eventually become James I of England, uniting crowns that had torn her family apart. So yes, the woman who spent youth flirting herself into prison became grandmother to a king who ruled both kingdoms. Not bad for someone whose hobbies included treasonous romance and stubborn survival. Margaret Douglas's story reads like a Tudor tragicomeddato, royal to ignore, too passionate to behave, and too smart to remain silent. In a world where one wrong glance could cost a head, she blinked knowingly twice and kept hers. If you wanted to make Elizabeth I furious, all you had to do was exist beautifully, quietly, and with red hair. Unfortunately for Lettice Knowles, she did all three. Lettice was Elizabeth's cousin and inconveniently her mirror image sharing Tudor blood. Golden complexion and the uncanny talent for making powerful men fools. The man in question was Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, Elizabeth's lifelong favorite and maybe lover. Historians still debate. When Dudley secretly married Lettice in 1578, it wasn't just a betrayal, it was a diplomatic catastrophe. Imagine marrying your boss's boyfriend, then showing up to work the next day wearing his coat. Elizabeth handled the news with regal composure, which meant she screamed, banished Lettice from court, and referred to her as the she-wolf. Dudley was forgiven, of course. Tudor England long held a habit of blaming women for men's enthusiasm, but Lettice wasn't the weeping type. She retreated to her estates, draped herself in velvet, and lived like a queen without the paperwork. Her marriage to Dudley was affectionate, but came with massive debts, enemies, and a reputation for mismanagement. Still, she kept her head, a genuine accomplishment in a family that lost several heads. After Dudley's death, Lettice remarried a younger soldier, Sir Christopher Blount. This did little to improve her standing with Elizabeth, who was, by then, jealous and elderly, a dangerous combination. When Blount joined a rebellion, Lettice was briefly imprisoned on suspicion of sympathy, which was royal code for the Queen still hates you. And yet, Lettice outlasted them all. Elizabeth died childless. Lettice lived to 88, an absurd age, in Tudor England stained mostly by spite. Lettice Knowles proved you didn't need a throne to rule. You needed good bone structure, better husbands, and patience to outlive your enemies. Fortunately, they always did. Few women in history have been both saint and scandal, but Mary, Queen of Scots, somehow managed both often in the same week. Born to rule and raised to confound expectations, she lived as if being graded on drama. If Elizabeth I was an icy calculation, Mary was human, fire, beautiful, impulsive, allergic to good decisions. She became queen at just 6 days old, which sounds impressive until you realize it meant inheriting a country full of angry men in skirts. The Scots adored her, in theory, but conspired against her in practice. After being married off to the French Dauphin, she spent her youth in Paris, learning to charm courtiers, recite Latin, and outdress everyone within miles. When her French husband died young, Mary returned to Scotland, widow, a queen, and still fabulously regal. Her next marriage to Lord Darnley looked noble and Catholic on paper, but hid a jealous trunk with the emotional stability of curdled milk. When he accused her of adultery, Mary's patience snapped faster than his sobriety. Soon after, Darnley's house exploded, and someone was kind enough to strangle him to be sure. Subtlety was not a Scottish virtue. Entered James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, the rugged noble who rescued Mary by allegedly kidnapping her. Accounts suggest she didn't resist much. Their scandalous marriage united Scotland in outrage. Even Tudor standards saw marrying your husband's prime murder suspect as bold. Rebellions followed. Mary fled and sought shelter in England, an idea so catastrophically poor it deserves its own monument. Elizabeth, I welcomed her cousin warmly, but locked her up for 19 years. Mary spent nearly 2 decades under house arrest, embroidering, praying, and occasionally plotting Elizabeth's assassination. When Elizabeth finally executed her, Mary wore red, the color of martyrdom and defiance. History remembers Mary as tragic, sensual, reckless, a queen who confused love for destiny and romance for strategy. Her story ended as she lived, loud, beautiful, in one dramatic gesture from sainthood. Mary, Queen of Scots, didn't rule her fate. She seduced it, and fate, predictably, couldn't resist. If the Tudor dynasty were a tragic play, Elizabeth would be the final act, the one where everyone was dead, the stage aflame, and somehow the last character still looked impeccable. They called her the Virgin Queen, though history has winked at that title for 5 centuries. Elizabeth inherited a nation broke, divided, and traumatized by her father's marital hobbies. Her childhood resume was a grim one, marked by witnessing her mother's beheading, her stepmother's mysterious disappearances, and her own imprisonment at the hands of her sister. By the time she became queen, she had mastered the 2 most important Tudor survival skills: trust no one, accessorize like your life depended on it. Elizabeth was brilliant and cunning, allergic to marriage proposals. Every European prince came calling Spain, France, even the Holy Roman Empire, but Elizabeth treated matrimony like the plague. Her stock answer was, "I am married to England," a phrase that sounds noble until you realize England was the most demanding husband imaginable. Still, the gossip never ceased. Her relationship with Robert Dudley, the dashing Earl of Leicester, is among history's favorite unresolved romances. He was charming, handsome, married a trifecta of Tudor danger. When his wife conveniently fell down a staircase and broke her neck, court whispers hinted at murder. Elizabeth handled it with professional detachment, feigning ignorance. Despite her talk of chastity, Elizabeth surrounded herself with handsome courtiers who penned poetry so steamy it would make a monk sweat. Yet she maintained her image as untouchable, the eternal flirt who never crossed the line. Historians still debate whether this restraint was virtue, calculation, or just impeccable time management. Her reign was long, glorious, and occasionally psychotic. She crushed the Spanish Armada, bankrolled pirates, she dubbed privateers, and exhausted her treasury on gowns, jewels, and flattery. When she died in 1603, unmarried and childless, she left behind an empire around 10,000 unanswered rumors. Elizabeth's so-called virginity was her greatest political weapon. It made her sacred, desirable, and impossible to control. The Virgin Queen never gave herself to anyone, which, in a way, meant she owned everyone. wealthy citizens prepared for business and leisure. In the forum, magistrates debated taxes beneath marble porticos. Across town, a gladiator wiped oil from his arms, training for evening games. Artists painted frescoes of lovers, gods, and eternal myths. Even the brothels were open before noon. Pompeii was nothing if not efficient. In Herculaneum, a smaller coastal town, fishermen mended nets by the sea. Children splashed in the shallows. Smoke drifted from kitchen hearths, where women simmered lentils and salted anchovies. The sun climbed higher. Heat shimmered off paving stones. Everything seemed perfectly normal till the dogs began to bark. Around midday, subtle tremors shook the earth. Locals barely noticed minor earthquakes were common in Campania. The shaking did not stop. Birds scattered from rooftops. Faint rumble echoed from the mountain. Some paused and looked up, then shrugged and continued. Life resumed its rhythm. By early afternoon, the air grew oddly still. A faint sulphurous scent drifted through the markets, mingling unexpectedly with figs and wine. Farmers on the slopes spotted the first puff of dark smoke curling from Vesuvius's peak. But that smoke would not dissipate. It would rise, spread, and darken the sky. It began with a sound, not thunder, but something deeper or low, continuous groan, like the earth exhaling after centuries of silence. Birds vanished, dogs whimpered, and bolted through the streets. Then came the first explosion. Round 1 in the afternoon, the summit of Mount Vesuvius cracked open. A jet of black smoke and molten debris shot upward with terrifying force, forming a vast column, clawing into the blue sky. Pliny the Younger, riding from across the bay, described it as a pine tree rising to the heavens, its trunk, a pillar of smoke, its branches, vast clouds of ash. Within minutes, daylight began to fade. Pompeians flooded the streets, craning their necks toward the mountain. Confusion mingled with awe. Some saw a fiery omen, a sign from the gods. Others fled to temples, offering frantic prayers to Jupiter and Vulcan, desperate for meaning. Housewives gathered valuables. Fathers argued whether to stay or flee. None truly comprehended what was unfolding. Then came the ash-fine, gray particles falling like snow. At first, people laughed, brushing flakes from hair and tunics. But they thickened, darkening the air, clogging throats. The sun vanished behind a rolling curtain of black. Torches were lit, but their flames flickered in suffocating dust. By the second hour, roofs creaked under the weight of pumice stones. The noise became unbearable. The hiss of falling ash, thunder of distant eruptions, screams of humans and animals. The wind carried choking sulfur across Campania. Roads quickly became impassable. Some tried to flee, but found their paths buried in air unbreathable. Others stayed, convinced the fury would pass. After all, the mountain had been quiet for generations. Perhaps, they hoped, the gods were angry, but would soon forgive. The volcanic column soared 20 miles high and grew, feeding a relentless rain of molten rock and fire for 18 hours straight. Papa witnessed the first omen, but failed to grasp that the end had already begun. By midday, the mountain's fury was total. The sky over Pompeii turned from blue to dense bruised gray. People stumbled through streets, covering their mouths, eyes streaming from sulfur. Every breath tasted of burnt stone and smoke. Inside homes, families huddled with oil lamps, listening to the muffled roar that never ceased. Wagons overturned, horses collapsed in panic. There was nowhere to run. Every road led back to the mountain's wrath. Then came lightning. But the gods had gone silent. Eculaneum, closer to the sea, the wind spared them ash for now, but the earth shook violently. Walls cracked. The sea drew back as if summoned by an unseen force. Fishermen rushed to the beach in confusion, unaware the water gathered for a far greater threat. Back in Pompeii, darkness deepened. Streets filled with cries of mothers clutching children, men calling for lost kin, animals trapped in stalls. A few resolved to protect their homes, unknowingly sealing their tombs. The air grew unbreathable. The world shrank to a few feet of visibility. Ash covered homes, bodies, dreams until Pompeii itself disappeared beneath the mountain it once revered. By nightfall, or rather, a darkness deeper than any night, the volcanic column, miles high, began collapsing under its own weight. From it poured a torrent of pumice stones, burning rock fragments, hot molten debris hurled onto the city. Each impact sounded like hammer blows. Roofs caved. The air reeked of burning oil, charred timber, and flesh. In the amphitheater, where crowds once roared for gladiators, only silence remained. Ash fell evenly over the marble seats like a burial shroud. In Herculaneum, the situation took a sinister turn. The retreating sea exposed the seabed, littered with gasping fish. Many ran toward it in wonder, just as a wall of steam and fire surged back from the horizon of the first pyroclastic surge racing toward the shore. It was over in seconds. Those who saw it never had time to scream. Back in Pompeii, people huddled in their homes, believing the worst had passed. They were wrong. The rain of fire was only the beginning. Beneath the ash, something far deadlier was forming, an invisible tide of heat and gas sweeping everything away. As dawn approached, though unseen, Vesuvius unleashed its deadliest weapon. The massive column, rising miles into the air, finally collapsed. What followed was neither lava nor fire from above, but a rolling avalanche of death, a pyroclastic surge, superheated gas, ash, and stone, traveling faster than any horse could run. It moved silently at first, then roared like 1,000 chariots charging downhill. In Herculaneum, those who had fled to the shoreline heard it too late. Survivors saw the wave of glowing smoke descend like molten glass. The heat, over 400 degrees Celsius, turned flesh to ash before screams could form. Dozens sought refuge in boathouses, clutching one another as the blast hit. Their bodies would remain there for nearly 2,000 years, perfectly preserved in agony. The surge never ceased. It raced down the mountain's flank, incinerating everything in its path. Vineyards, olive groves, villas vanished. When it reached Pompeii, the wave tore through the city like a divine breath. Roofs ripped away, walls exploded, bodies were thrown across rooms. Those who survived the night's bombardment faced instant death. There was no escape, no mercy. The very air became a weapon dense and boiling. Inside one villa, a family covered their faces with cloths, praying the storm would pass. In a single instant, they were frozen lungs, scorched, outlines sealed in ash. A woman clutching a child, a man shielding his wife, a dog chained by its collar, all preserved, immortalized in terror. Above them, Vesuvius thundered again, sending another surge, sweeping through what remained. The mountain's power was endless, its fury absolute. The city that once pulsed with laughter and trade was now a gray wasteland of twisted shapes and collapsed roofs. By the time the final waves hit, Pompeii was gone. The gods of Rome, Jupiter, Venus, Apollo, were silent beneath 30 feet of ash. The world above would forget the names of its victims, but the mountain remembered. Beneath its gray tomb, the people of Pompeii lay waiting statues in dust, frozen in the instant life became history. When the roaring finally ceased, an eerie calm settled over the Bay of Naples. The sky, once ablaze with fire and thunder, hung heavy in still a gray haze, dimming the morning light. The air was ripe with sulfur and death. Ash drifted across the sea like snow, covering boats floating silently with abandoned oars. The world had become too quiet. From Misenum, across the bay, Roman Admiral Pliny the Elder watched the mountain's wrath from his ship. The previous night, he had sailed with a fleet to rescue those trapped along the coast, dead. As the first pyroclastic surges struck Herculaneum, his ships were forced to turn back. The sea boiled, the wind vanished, and oppressive darkness swallowed the horizon. He never returned. Witnesses said he collapsed near Stabia, suffocated by toxic fumes. A man of science, consumed by the very curiosity that made him great. Those who escaped stumbled through an unrecognizable landscape. Vineyards were gone, rivers had changed course, entire towns vanished beneath layers of ash, so thick that roads disappeared. Farmers searching for homes found only hills of gray where villages once stood. The mountain loomed still, its peak torn open and steaming like an unhealing wound. For days, ash continued to fall, smothering everything within miles. Few who returned to sift through ruins found only silence-veined outlines of doorways, charred beams, ghostly impressions of the dead. Whispers claimed the gods had buried Pompeii for its sins, that Venus herself had turned away from the city, that had worshipped her in name but not virtue. As weeks passed, nature quietly reclaimed the land. Grass sprouted through cracks in ash. Birds returned cautiously. The memory of the eruption faded into rumor. A warning turned to myth. The empire moved on. Rome barely noticed. Pompeii and Herculaneum slipped beneath history's surface, sealed in their ashen tombs. Sleeping almost 17 centuries, waiting for the day their story would rise again from dust. Centuries passed. Grass grew over buried towns. Pompeii faded into legend. Farmers plowed fields, unaware that beneath their feet lay entire streets, frozen in the moment of death. The quiet mountain became part of the landscape once more. Travelers passing through Campania saw only fertile soil and olive groves, never imagining the vast necropolis sleeping below. By the Middle Ages, Pompeii vanished from maps. Romans who survived had died, and descendants no longer knew where the city stood. Some believed it swallowed by the sea. Others whispered the gods buried it as punishment for arrogance. So the mountain was left alone, its story buried as deeply as its victims. Then, in 1599, a canal digger unearthed something strange: frescoed walls, bones, and strange inscriptions beneath volcanic earth. The discovery frightened more than fascinated. Workers sealed the site again, fearing the wrath of the gods. It would take another century before curiosity triumphed over superstition. In 1748, under the reign of Charles III of Bourbon, systematic excavations began. What they uncovered stunned the world. Entire villas emerged, paintings still vibrant, mosaics intact. Bronze statues stood undisturbed since that final day of AD 79. Bread still sat in ovens carbonized, but perfectly shaped. Dogs lay chained to doorposts, and hundreds of bodies appeared in lifelike poses, their faces frozen in eternal breaths. Archaeologists poured plaster into cavities left by decayed flesh, revealing hauntingly human figures, mother shielding her child, man covering his mouth, a couple locked in their final embrace. Pompeii was reborn not as a city of the living, but a ghost preserved in stone. Its rediscovery offered something no text or scroll ever could: a direct glimpse into Roman life, its beauty, excess, and fragility. The city that once died in silence began to speak again, whispering warnings through cracked walls and ash-stained frescoes that nature never forgets. That time, no matter how long, always uncovers the truth. Pompeii's rediscovery revealed not just ruins, but people. Every fresco, mosaic, and plaster cast spoke the language of tragedy and beauty. Scholars and artists who walked those silent streets in the 18th and 19th centuries described it as visiting a city caught between life and death. Echoes of laughter, footsteps, and market cries seemed trapped in the air, preserved for centuries beneath silence. Walls showed graffiti of everyday Romans' love notes, insults, political slogans, all untouched by time. One inscription read, "Gaius Pommadius Diplus was here," scratched into plaster nearly 2 millennia earlier. Others carried humor. "If anyone sits here, let him read this before he dies. Drink wine, be merry." The wit of a people long dead survived their bodies. Pompeii ceased to be just an archaeological site, became a diary written by the doomed. Yet, as more of the city was uncovered, fascination mingled with discomfort. The plaster figures, locked forever in the moment of death, were too human. Mothers, slaves, children, lovers, their expressions clear and heartbreaking. Visitors came to stare, some moved to tears, others morbidly curious. Museums filled with relics, silver cups, jewelry, even carbonized loaves of bread, a silent testament to ordinary lives abruptly halted. By the late 19th century, Pompeii had become a symbol of impermanence, a warning carved in ash. Writers and poets such as Dickens, Goethe, and Twain walked its streets. They found horror in intimacy, civilization that had everything and lost it in a single day. Artists painted it as a romantic tragedy. Scientists studied it as a geological marvel. Yet, beneath every interpretation lingered the unease that what happened once could happen again. And indeed, it could. Vesuvius still smoked quietly on the horizon, its slopes dotted with villages. Locals farmed the same soil that buried their ancestors. Tourists admire the view, unaware of what sleeps below. The mountain, patient and silent, waits. In the ruins of Pompeii endures one truth: human brilliance and fragility are forever entwined, and beneath beauty, the earth remembers everything. Today, Mount Vesuvius remains quiet, deceptively so. Its slopes are green again, lined with vineyards producing the same wine once poured in Pompeian taverns. Tourists hike to its rim, peer into the crater, and snap photos where once gods breathed fire. To the casual eye, Mount Vesuvius seems peaceful, a sleeping giant that has long since surrendered its rage. But beneath that serene facade lies a cauldron still alive, simmering in silence. Scientists know this well. The magma chamber beneath has not cooled. It waits, patient and watchful. At its feet, modern Naples bustles, a city of millions living in the shadow of ancient death. Children play soccer on plains where ash once fell like snow. Farmers plow fields that hide the bones of emperor subjects. Each year, tremors ripple through the region, reminders that the earth is not as stable as it appears. Locals shrugged off the quakes, just as the Romans did in 79 CE. Human memory is short, but the mountain is patient. Volcanologists monitor Vesuvius constantly. Sensors, buried deep, record every pulse and whisper. Maps outline evacuation zones. Plans are drawn and redrawn. But even experts admit that if Vesuvius were to erupt again, chaos would ensue. The population living around it vastly outnumbers that of Roman times. The fertile land that once sustained an empire still tempts those who choose to live close enough to risk losing everything once more. Yet, Vesuvius remains strangely magnetic. Pilgrims of history and curiosity climb its slopes to gaze upon plains where two cities vanished. From above, the outline of Pompeii is still visible: streets, walls, amphitheaters, a fossilized heartbeat of Rome's golden age. The silence there feels heavy, almost reverent. Though the city is gone, its story pulses stronger than ever. The eruption of 79 CE was more than tragedy. It was a mirror reflecting that civilizations, however powerful, exist on borrowed time. That beauty, art, and order can vanish in an instant. Vesuvius sleeps now, its breath hidden beneath centuries of calm. But its shadow stretches through time, reminding us that beneath every moment of peace, the world's fire still burns, unseen, waiting, eternal. Long before the crowds screamed his name, Scorpus was nothing. A slave boy born into dust and danger. He likely hailed from Hispania, far province, where fate played cruel hands. Captured or sold into servitude, he was trained young for the violent ballet of the Circus Maximus, the arena where horses, wheels, and men blurred into thunder. Boys like him were molded into racers. Childhoods traded for speed. Charioteering was no child's game. Training began before sunrise. Scorpus learned to control 4 horses, the quadriga balancing on a wooden platform no wider than a door. One slip meant death, dragged beneath hooves, crushed and lost. Instructors were ruthless. The arena showed no mercy. Neither did Rome. He was property, a tool for entertainment. In the empire, even a slave could chase glory. Charioteers who survived long enough could earn freedom and unimaginable wealth. The factions ruling the circus, the reds, blues, greens, and whites, were more than teams. They were empires, with patrons, political sway, and fanatic supporters who painted city walls with slogans of devotion. Scorpus began in the stables of one faction, shoveling manure, grooming horses, watching races from shadows. But he had something others didn't: precision, nerve, and terrifying calm amidst chaos. He could read a horse's breath, foresee rivals' mistakes, and flick reins like an artist's brush. When he finally entered his first race, the crowd barely noticed a nameless slave among legends. But when gates opened and horses exploded forward, Scorpus handled reins with impossible grace. He took the inside curve so tightly, even veterans flinched. Dust rose, wheels screamed. By the final lap, his name was on every tongue. He crossed the finish line, no longer a slave, but a promise, a star born. The crowd roared. For the first time, Scorpus looked up at the imperial box and thought, maybe the gods have noticed me. The Circus Maximus, Rome's heartbeat, madness, and addiction, held 250,000 souls, each shouting, betting, praying for victory. Chariot racing wasn't mere sport, it was religion. Supporters wore faction colors like war, paint, the blues, greens, reds, whites. Men died for these colors. Riots spilled from circus to city streets. Senators and slaves locked eyes, united in dust storms of the track. For Scorpus, the circus was stage and battlefield. Races began with ritual: the creak of starting gates, blare of trumpets, pounding hooves, 7 laps, 1,200 meters each, Every inch could kill. Corners were killers. Too wide lost time. A tight crash deadly enough to drag rivals into tangles of reins and blood. Scorpus mastered corners few before him matched. His chariot brushed death without fear. Crowds gasped as he cut turns close enough for wheels to kiss posts. His control seemed supernatural. Veterans stared in disbelief. To the people, Scorpus wasn't just a racer. He was possessed by the gods of speed. Victories piled. His fame rose. His name appeared on graffiti across Rome. Scorpus, pride of the Greens. Victory to Scorpus. Children carved his name. Vendors sold clay figures. Fans chanted in taverns, argued in baths. He was everywhere, the empire's first true celebrity athlete. But fame brought pressure. Factions were ruthless. Lose, and they replaced you. Win, and they worked you till exhaustion. Every race risked death-snapped axles, broken reins, falls beneath hooves. Scorpus had seen too many friends dragged into dirt. Yet still, he raced and won as if outrunning fate itself. The crowd adored him. The gods, as always, watched. To understand Scorpus is to understand Rome's world. City divided not by class or politics, but by colors. Factions ruled passions. Greens and blues were giants. Their rivalries built from circus to street brawls, sabotage, bribes. Reds and whites were lesser powers, but fiercely devoted. Scorpus rode for the green speed style, ruthless ambition. Their stables filled with the empire's best horses, imported from Numidia and Hispania, animals worth more than villas. To win for the Greens meant wealth, women, immortality. To lose meant ridicule or worse. Pressure was relentless. The circus was a theater of extremes. Each faction had spies, mechanics, even magicians, blessing horses. Drivers were celebrities and targets. Sabotage was common. Reins cut, wheels tampered, horses drugged. When Scorpus appeared at gates, fans erupted, green scarves waving, names shouted like war cries. He was their champion, weapon against the blues. The blues had their Pompeius, Muscluses, veteran racer, cunning and brutal. Their duels became talk of Rome. One race gained legend neck and neck on final lap. Chariots so close, horses brushed. Muscluses tried cutting Scorpus off at turn, a deadly move. But Scorpus anticipated. With a wrist flick, he hugged posts so close crowd gasped. Muscluses' chariot shattered on barrier. Scorpus flew ahead in victory tunic and face streaked with blood and dust. Stance exploded. People threw garlands and coins onto track. The emperor rose to applaud. Rome had found its hero. Yet even as Scorpus basked, he knew the price greater: fame, envy, danger. In Circus Maximus, crowd loved only while you won. Scorpus, for all his brilliance, raced toward a finish line no man could escape. By his 20s, he was untouchable. Rome's fastest man, darling of the Greens, face selling charms, amulets, wine cups bearing his likeness. He became what Rome never truly saw: sports celebrity. But beneath cheers and gilded rewards, his life remained chained to the track that enslaved him. Each race a roll of death's dice. His charioteers tied reins around waists. Poor control so crashes dragged them like ragdolls beneath hooves. Scorpus had seen it countless times. Arena crews carried hooks to drag dead and dying, efficient, brutal, routine. Each morning he saw those hooks and wondered how long before they worked for him. Yet still he raced. More he won, more people demanded. the wear began to show. His body ached, his reflexes dulled, but he refused to slow down. Scorpus cannot lose, the fans shouted, and he believed them. Each morning, as he stood in the chariot yard lacing the reins, he stared at the mountain of wreaths, trophies, and gold plates that lined his chamber proof of his immortality. Yet somewhere deep inside, he knew what every charioteer knew, but never spoke aloud. The circus did not crown heroes, it devoured them, and Rome was always hungry for another fall. To understand Scorpus, you must understand his horses. They were his partners, weapons, salvation. He drove a quadriga 4 horses, abreast names whispered across the empire like legends: Celer, Swift, Phalacer, Flying One, Cadinus, and Sparsus. Each trained not only for speed, but for temperament, balance, and precision. Slightest panic in one could mean death for all. Every morning before dawn, Scorpus visited their stables. He spoke softly, running hands over manes, checking straps himself. He knew their moods, their snorts, their rhythm. To him, they were comrades, not beasts. The bond was sacred trust, forged in terror. In the race, horses obeyed the flick of wrists, the pressure of reins, or even shouted words through thunderous hooves. The greens spared no expense. Their horses, bathed in olive oil, fed mixtures of barley and honey, massaged after every run. Rome adored them almost as much as the drivers. Children named them. Poets praised them. To Scorpus, they were family, the only beings who knew what it was like to fly on the edge of death. During races, he spoke like a general commanding soldiers, guiding the leftmost horse, the finalist sinister, with tenderness and authority, keeping the team tight on the inner curve between brutality and grace. When they moved, they became one, a living storm of muscle, dust, and willpower. There were fleeting, unforgettable moments when Scorpus felt weightless. The crowd vanished, dust parted, and he felt the horse's pulse as his own heartbeat. Those moments were his reward to the illusion of control over chaos, mastery over fate. Yet every time the gates opened, the gods rolled their dice. One stumble, one cracked wheel, one frightened horse hand. Rome's fastest man could become a corpse on the sand. But Scorpus was no fool. Born in dust, he intended to die in the wind. Victories multiplied. So did his fortune. By his mid-20s, he was richer than most senators. Prize money from over 2,000 wins was staggering. Each victory earned gold, jewels, even villas. He had soared from slave to superstar, obscurity to adoration by emperors. He bought his freedom early, but the arena wouldn't release him. The Greens gave him a luxurious estate, chariots crafted by masters, servants to tend his every whim. His likeness adorned oil lamps, mosaics, drinking cups, graffiti praising him covered tavern walls. Victory to Scorpus. He drives like the wind. Even noble women whispered his name behind silk fans. Rome's most desirable bachelor was also its most dangerous man. Emperor Domitian invited Scorpus to banquets, seating him near senators who once forbade him even to clean their sandals. But fame's edges were sharp. To some, he was hero. To others, a reminder that Rome's hierarchy was fragile. A former slave, richer than patricians, adored by mobs, intoxicated and threatened. Despite wealth and flattery, Scorpus lived simply. His heart belonged to the track. Days spent training horses, perfecting turns, studying rivals' weaknesses. Asked why he kept racing, he replied, "The crowd doesn't cheer for rest." To disappoint Rome was unthinkable. The city demanded spectacle, and he was its favorite. Yet the crowd's love grew greedy, expecting miracles every race, roaring his name as if divine when he won, booing with equal ferocity when he faltered. Scorpus knew fame's fickle nature. Like his horses, powerful, beautiful, easily lost. Still, when he rode, everything else vanished, the politics, expectations, danger. Only wind, thunderous hooves, and the taste of dust remained. For those few minutes in the Circus Maximus, Scorpus was no freedman or green faction pawn. He was Rome itself, wild, glorious, doomed to burn faster than imagined. The crowds saw triumph, never the toll. Every wind carved a little more life from him. A charioteer's body aged faster than a soldier's. Lungs burned from dust and ash. Eyes squinted against sun and grit. Circus heroes were buried young, their names in tombs, not triumphal arches. Every driver knew this. Scorpus knew best. Yet each dawn, he strapped reins around his waist and stepped into the chariot that might kill him. Rome loved him, but his love was cruel. The crews that cheered would roar at his death. Spectacular enough, it was omen. Friends begged him to retire whole. He smiled, waving off worries. The race ends when the sand drinks the blood, he joked words only a man who tasted death could utter. Unease grew. Rivals muttered, heat tempted fate, too long. Priests warned Fortuna's will, spun fastest for those on top. Tech. But Scorpus couldn't stop. Outside the circus, life wasn't life. The roar, trembling ground, horses breaking free, that was existence. Deep down, he knew his next victory could be his last. Rome built legends to burn brightly and vanish in dust. On a cold winter morning in 95 AD, Scorpus climbed into his chariot for what would be his final race. The Circus Maximus sky was a flat gray, dulling armor's shine, turning dust to ash. Crowds filled stands, roaring for greens, blues, reds, whites. When Scorpus appeared at gates, even noise shifted Rome. New greatness. Horses seller, Velosa Catinus, Sparsus stamped, snorted. Sensing tension, Scorpus leaned forward, murmured to steady breath, his own and theirs. Thousands of times he had done this, but today felt distant, as if watching himself. Fatigue, fate. The horn sounded. Gates flew open. 12 chariots burst forth like unleashed storm. Dust soared. Crowds' roar became endless wave. Scorpus took inside track signature move, turning so tight wheels grazed post. By fourth lap, in second place, tunic streaked with sweat and grime. Then, on sixth lap, rounding bend, disaster struck. One horse stumbled, left rein snapped for air, almost impossible. Harmony shattered, chariot lurched, spun, tipped, wheels struck, barriers splintering like bone. Reins around Scorpus's waist dragged him beneath his team. Crowd gasped sound louder than thunder, then silence. When dust settled, Scorpus lay motionless, mangled by power that made him immortal. Greens stopped cheering. Even blues lowered banners. Rome had witnessed thousands of deaths, but this one cut deep. Greatest racer lost, not the man, but destiny. As race ended, silence heavier than stone hung over Circus Maximus. Emperor's attendants covered faces. Keepers stopped recording laps. Wagers. Scorpus was gone. Instant death. Spine snapped, broken beneath hooves. Yet in Rome, death marked beginning of legend. Within hours, word spread from Suburra to Palatine Hill. People whispered, Scorpus is dead. Tavern patrons slammed cups in disbelief. Boys, dreaming of racing for greens, wept in streets. Graffiti, once praising victory, to Scorpus scrawled new words. Rome mourns her champion. Greens held imperial funeral. Body carried draped in emerald cloth, helmet shining one last time. Musicians played dirges. Crowd threw flowers and laurels along path. Emperor ordered monument. Marble relief showed Scorpus holding palm of victory forever frozen in triumph. His epitaph, found centuries later, read, "I am Scorpus." Carried off by the envy of swift fate at 26, after 2,048 victories, even death could not eclipse his record. He lived faster and brighter than any of his age, and Rome never forgot. In time, Scorpus' story became more than a tale of individual triumph. It became a symbol of glory, mortality, and Rome's insatiable hunger for spectacle. Later, racers invoked his name before entering the arena, praying for even a fragment of his luck and courage. Poets compared him to Achilles, doomed to a greatness that could not last. And though centuries have passed, the dust of the Circus Maximus still holds his ghost. Each fragment whispers the same truth. Scorpus may have died young, but he never truly stopped racing. His wheels still turn in Rome's memory, forever chasing the finish line where mortals become immortal. Turning now from Rome to ancient Greece, the gymnasium was far more than a place for exercise. It was a sanctuary where body and spirit met the divine. Every major city-state boasted one a sprawling complex of colonnades, training yards, and shaded courtyards lined with olive trees. The word gymnasium itself derives from gymnos, meaning naked. Training nude was not scandalous, but sacred. The Greeks believed the human form reflected the gods' every muscle, every sinew, a testament to divine craftsmanship. The gymnasium was a stage for that perfection, where mortals strived to reach the balance and beauty of Olympus. Dawn brought athletes carrying small jars of olive oil. The air was cool and still, heavy with dew and laurel. Before exercises began, the patriarchs, the trainer raised his hands to the sky, leading prayers to Zeus, Hermes, and Heracles, gods of competition, speed, and strength. Signs a small offering, few drops of oil, a laurel branch, a libation of wine was placed at nearby altars. Young athletes stood still, their oiled skin gleaming under morning sun. This was no vanity, it was ritual. The oil symbolized vitality, and the divine fire within protected the body and honored the gods who granted strength. Anointed, they dusted themselves with fine sand from training yards, giving grip and connecting flesh with earth, mortal with eternal. When prayers ended, courtyards came alive with crack of discus, thud of javelins, and rhythmic shouts of wrestling men. Beneath sweat and exertion, everything was bound by reverence. The gymnasium was where champions were made and where citizens worshipped through motion. To sweat was to pray. Before a muscle flexed or a discus flew, the Greek athlete began his sacred transformation with oil. Olive oil, the lifeblood of Greece, came from Athena's groves, pressed in bronze vats, stored in alabaster flasks called alabastra. To anoint was devotion, transforming ordinary men into something almost divine. In soft morning light, men gathered in the apodyterion, the undressing room. There, cloaks and sandals shed, nobles and commoners stood equal under God's gaze. Slaves offered oil. Athletes rubbed it slowly across skin, the sharp scent of green and the metallic tints of bronze filling the air. Laying softened skin, prevented injury, trapped warmth. But deeper still was its spiritual meaning. The olive tree was sacred to Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy. Its oil symbolized purity and strength. Anointing invited divine favor, calling the goddess to dwell in limbs that would soon test their limits. After anointing came the stridula, curved bronze or iron blade to scrape away the mixture of oil, sweat, and dust clinging to skin. The scraping made a rhythmic, rasping sound, oddly soothing. The residue of gray paste was sometimes collected in jars for supposed healing powers. To Greeks, even athletes, sweat carried sacred energy. When bodies shone like polished marble, athletes prepared skin glowing, heart steady, minds focused. Every movement became ritual. Oil was not armor, but offering. A oiled body pleased gods as much as a well-toned lyre. Beauty was holiness. Gymnasium bodies hymns sung in motion. Once gleaming with oil, athletes dusted themselves in sand, not just dirt, but sacred conas, collected from accumulated sweat and footprints. Practically, sand prevented slipping in wrestling or loss of grip in combat. Symbolically, oil represented divine favor, dust, mortality. Together, they balanced body and soul, heaven and earth. To coat the oiled body in sand was to acknowledge mortality, that all men remain bound to Gaia's soil. The Greeks found beauty in this contradiction perfection, wrapped in impermanence. In gymnasia, trainers moved among men, ensuring balance neither too oily nor too dry. Too much oil meant slipping from victory. Too much dust meant burying oneself before the fight. Philosophy made physical moderation as ritual. Then athletes tested bodies, flexing, stretching, sand shifting like gold on skin. To philosophers, poets, and spectators, the sight approached the divine. Human forms, sculpted and shining, became images of Olympus. Many sculptors modeled god statues on gymnasium athletes, their poses born of these warm-ups. Before sparring, athletes often scooped dust, pressed it to chest, whispering prayers sometimes to Zeus, sometimes Heracles. They found divine connection in that grainy embrace, flesh meeting earth. The gymnasium floor shimmered not with blood or violence, but bodies kissed by oil and dust. Here, Greeks found holiness not in temples, but motion, sacred choreography of mortals, striving to resemble gods. Before the first race, first discus, every athlete turned to gods. The gymnasium was sacred. Competition, divine theater ritual performed for Olympus. Every contest began not with movement, but prayer. Athletes gathered before small altars dedicated to Zeus, Hermes, or Heracles, gods of strength, speed, and struggle. Incense filled the air. A priest or elder stepped forward, a bowl of grain or wine in hand. Silence fell. Spectators, stilled for Greeks, believed gods watched matches as eagerly as mortals. The priest raised hands, echoing words across centuries. Grant these men strength without hubris, courage without rage, and victory worthy of the gods. Whispers for Hermes' speed, Apollo's grace, Zeus' triumph, Nike's favor. Offerings were simple barley cakes, oil sprages, laurel sprigs. No athlete dared compete without honoring divine order governing fate and fortune. To compete without prayer was blasphemous, arrogance, the worst sin. Champions' new victories were borrowed gifts from gods, snatched away without warning. Many vowed to dedicate crowns to Zeus or donate prize money to temples. After prayers, tension broke. Crowd erupted in cheers. In that still moment between supplication and competition, mortal and god stood side by side. The contest was not mere sport, it was worship made visible. When prayers ended, training began not chaos, but careful ritual. The gymnasium became symphony of motion. Calms locked arms in clouds of dust, muscles shining. Calms sprinted along packed earth with rhythmic precision. Grunts, shouts, and javelins cracking echoed beneath marble colonnades. Training was philosophy made physical. Each discipline represented virtue. Wrestling taught endurance and cunning. Running built perseverance. Discus demanded grace. Javelin required precision. To train the body was to discipline the soul. No man is free, said Epictetus, who is not master of himself. The gymnasium was where that mastery began. The Pata tribes the trainer watched closely. Every morning, the air was cool, heavy with the scent of dew and laurel leaves. Athletes, young men in pursuit of art excellent, carried small jars of olive oil, prepared to anoint themselves in rituals sacred and deliberate. Anointed bodies moved with grace and purpose, each motion a prayer, each breath an offering to the gods of strength, speed, and wisdom. Nobles and slaves, farmers and soldiers, all gathered in the same space. Small offerings, cakes of barley, sprigs of laurel, tiny cups of wine were presented, with hopes that the gods would favor the mortal contest. The Greek philosopher Epictetus proclaimed that mastery over oneself was the highest goal. And here in the gymnasium, that sacred endeavor began. Each movement, each exercise, was more than muscular effort. It was a ritual act of communion. The body was an instrument of the divine, and every effort was a prayer. After hours of exertion, the athletes would gather in the baths, simple yet profound. Cool water was poured over their bodies, and the curved steel strigil rasped across flesh, scraping away oil, sweat, and sand. The sound was rhythmic and soothing, like a quiet hymn. The residue was collected, sometimes believed to hold healing magic, a testament to the power and sanctity of their exertions. This act of cleansing was more than hygienic. It was therapeutica, rhythmic purging of pride, envy, and wrath, restoring harmony to the soul. The scent of fresh olive oil and fragrant incense filled the air, a celebration of renewal. Poets and priests recited hymns as the bodies, now purified, reflected divine perfection. In the evenings, the gymnasium became a forum for reflection, philosophy, and companionship. Men discussed virtue and justice under the starlit sky, their bodies and minds united in pursuit of excellence. This harmony of body and soul was the very essence of Greek ideals and eternal dance of discipline and grace. Thus, the Greek gymnasium was a sacred space, a place where mortals touched the divine through motion, where the pursuit of excellence became a form of worship. Every ritual, every prayer was a step closer to Olympus itself, a place where the human spirit soared in quiet reverence, forever seeking the divine harmony etched in flesh and thought.